Hi, this is John Thorson, head Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week, Torah and Psychology post, Parashat Vayishlach, and continuing to discuss the war in Israel, is relating to the idea and the concept of Antisemitism and Gestalt. And Gestalt is summarized with the following sentence, the following phrase, of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, which means that we view something as being a single entity, an individual single entity in and of itself, rather than being a collection of individual parts. And this is viewed and is understood in different ways. You can see this as through cognitive perception, that when a person views an image, even if that image is missing certain parts, the brain is able to fill in the gaps in a sense. It's able to view it as a single whole entity. So rather than the image being understood as being a collection of individual parts, and therefore if something's missing, it changes the image, the brain is able to understand it from a Gestalt perspective as being, it holds this whole image in and of itself as being a separate entity, and therefore it's able to still view it as being a whole image, even with a part missing. Or from a Gestalt therapeutic point of view, a person is encouraged to view themselves as being a whole entity, not as being a collection of different parts of individual characteristics, rather that the whole is being viewed and as an integration of all the elements together, of the body, the mind, the thoughts and emotions of a person, and this is viewed as a whole. It's seen as a cohesive unit, which is held together as an individual single entity in and of itself. And through this insight, a person is able to understand how they can bring about change in their life, rather because their problems are not based on a single individual aspect of themselves, a single trait or characteristic, or even an episode or diagnosis, but rather this whole, more holistic view. This viewing themselves as a whole gives insight into themselves as a person, and this is the key to being able to bring about change. And if we look at the current situation in Israel, and it's something which I've discussed a few times now over the month to 2 months of the achdus that we are experiencing, I think if we view it through a Gestalt perspective, it's able to clarify a little bit more of what is the nature of this achdus, this unity in Klal Yisrael. Because the unity is not just a coming together of individual people. The Klal Yisrael, the individual Jewish people, the individuals are coming together, and there's more cohesion. Because that in itself, or viewing, or the achdus is dependent on every single person coming together, is unrealistic. It's an unrealistic expectation, or even impossible. But that doesn't mean that there can't be achdus. It doesn't mean that we are not experiencing achdus, because if it's viewed through a Gestalt understanding, then Klal Yisrael is actually viewed as a single unit, as a single entity in and of itself that is distinct from the idea of a collection of individuals. That Klal Yisrael is not just a collection of all the people together, and achdus is not just a coming together of all the individual people together, but rather, it's an understanding and tapping into this conceptualization of Klal Yisrael standing alone as a single unit, as a single entity in and of itself. And we can learn this out from this week's parasha. That Rav Soloveitchik explains that if we look at the dynamic of the relationship between Yaakov and Esav, even from the very beginning of 2 weeks ago in the parasha, we read about Yaakov and Esav fighting in the womb of their mother. That was the beginning of their relationship, and that is how it was and how it always will be. The Yaakov and Esav fight, and in this week's parasha again, they are preparing. Yaakov is preparing to meet Esav and to fight him again, and he fought with his malach. And we see this is a manifestation of the relationship, the inherent nature of the relationship between Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov being Klal Yisrael, that stands as a distinct individual whole entity, separate from the rest of the world, separate from the rest of the nations. Yaakov and Esav is a representation of the dynamic of Klal Yisrael in relation to the rest of the world. It could be that the fact that the Klal Yisrael stands alone and are different is something which creates a sense of hatred, a sense of conflict, but there's more to it than that. Which Rav Soloveitchik is explaining that anti-Semitism isn't something that was born out of the state of Israel, where it's a political or Zionistic concept, but rather it's metaphysical, that Klal Yisrael stands alone as a single concept, as a single individual entity that does not relate to or is dependent on the collection of the individuals, the collection of the individual Jewish people in Klal Yisrael, but rather it stands and is conceptualized as a separate whole entity in and of itself. And this is why, and this is the anti-Semitism, this is the distinct nature of Klal Yisrael, which is separate to the rest of the world, which is separate to other nations. And this is what we need to tap into. We need to understand that we, being part of Klal Yisrael, we are living through this dynamic of Yaakov and Esau. This is the very inherent nature of our existence, of being part of Klal Yisrael, not because we are an individual Jewish person being part of Klal Yisrael, but because we are a person. We are connecting to this ideal. We are connecting to an understanding of what Klal Yisrael means as being a whole single entity. And therefore, even if there is still some fraction, there's still some friction in the relationships, in the interactions in Klal Yisrael. Maybe there's still elements of disagreement within Klal Yisrael, and that will always be. It's impossible to expect that everyone will come together and that should be complete cohesion. But rather, what we are tapping into and what we are seeing at this time is an understanding that this has always been the nature of Klal Yisrael, right from the time of Yaakov and Esau. And this is how it will always be. The Klal Yisrael is a single Gestalt, individual entity, rather than being the sum of its individual parts. And this is what we are tapping into, and this is what we are experiencing. It's an appreciation and an understanding and an acceptance that we are Klal Yisrael, we are a single entity, and this is how it will be, and this is what will help us to overcome the difficulties that we're struggling with right now, and this will help us at all times to come through the difficulties of Yaakov versus Esau, which is how it was from the very beginning, and unfortunately is the nature of our existence. This is the message that we need to understand, to tap into this Gestalt concept of Achdus, and hopefully it will help us to get through this current war as well. Have a great Shabbos, and keep well.